In part 2 of this series, I identify the families that created and maintain the system, which preserves their incredible wealth and power at our expense. Actually, I mentioned the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, DuPonts, Morgans, and of course the Bushes. So what have these freaks been up to? What specifically have they done to build and strengthen the system? Well, I suspect they're behind that too, but let's talk about some more important stuff. Yes, even more important than our national obsession with sweaty young men dragging one another to the ground. Bingo! Let's talk about the Federal Reserve. Don't worry, I'll be brief, and then we can move on to the fun stuff like assassinations and stolen elections. So the system began in 1913, really, with the creation of the Fed, brought to life through the efforts of two of our conspirators, J.P. Morgan and John Rockefeller. The Fed is a central banking system of the sort that was criticized by, among others, Thomas Jefferson. Among the many criticisms of the Fed are that it is not part of the government, but is privately owned, meaning it's not accountable to anyone and doesn't have to have any transparency. So a bunch of Wall Street assholes meet in secret and determine the economic fate of the whole world. Yes, so they know how to manipulate markets so they and their friends can make tons of dough. I won't bore you with the details, but they do it by creating booms and busts in different industries from time to time. Bingo! They invest in those industries during the boom, and then they create the bust themselves by selling off their holdings, and then they make a killing. And they've been doing this for decades. No matter what the economic theory of the moment, they adapt the system to fit it. Keynesianism, supply side. Okay, on to the cool stuff. So what have these pricks used their increasing wealth and power to accomplish? In other words, what crimes have they committed to protect and strengthen the system? Maybe. But stuff much worse than that. In episode 2, I mentioned the business plot, where our conspirators attempted to violently overthrow Franklin Roosevelt and replace him with a fascist dictator. Then they killed JFK. Oh, that's right. It's crazy to think that the CIA and Dallas police conspired to kill Kennedy. But it's somehow sensible to believe that an unstable young man who was a shitty shot planted one right in Kennedy's skull from long range using a cheap rifle with a tree between him and his target. You know who thought there was a conspiracy to kill JFK? Congress. The House Select Committee on Assassinations determined in 1979 that Kennedy was, quote, probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. No shit. You know who else thought there was a conspiracy? Lyndon Johnson, Robert Kennedy, and Richard Nixon, to name a few. Nixon's suspicions led to his downfall. Well, that too, of course. But if you listen to the Watergate tapes, Nixon was trying to obtain information from the CIA and the FBI about the, quote, Bay of Pigs. But that was just code for the JFK assassination. And when Nixon's men started snooping around about that, the CIA got spooked. Pun intended. Oh, sorry. So, some CIA assets attached to the White House set Nixon up for a fall, botching the Watergate operation on purpose. So it was actually the system that took down Nixon. Well, while President Carter was negotiating with Iran for the return of our hostages, George Bush Sr., on behalf of the Reagan campaign, was also negotiating with Iran. Except he wanted them to keep the hostages, at least until after the 1980 election. So basically, Iran sold our hostages to the highest bidder. And no surprise, the system outbid the US government. The system also infused our inner cities with crack as an excuse to start the war on drugs, which, by the way, they make a ton of money on, largely through the private prison industry. Then they stole the elections of 2000 and 2004 with voting machines manufactured by their friends. And on and on and on. Basically, if something catastrophic happens in the world, they likely caused it. They certainly profited from it. And they may have even used it as an opportunity to have their private security companies conduct training exercises in crowd control, rather than, say, helping the victims. So that's what they do. They use their wealth and power to acquire more wealth and power. while herding all of us into sports stadiums. On the next episode of Johnny Explains a Conspiracy, I discuss the where of the conspiracy, as in, where did my rights go?